And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Cheryl and Kevin Go To. And today we are in Canada. Now, like the USA, Canada is a really big country and it's going to be a struggle to cover the whole thing, but we haven't seen a huge amount of it. We've just sort of hopped in and out of the larger cities. And we're going to go from east to west, and that means that we start in Montreal, which
That's
is
right.
French speaking.
Yes, although an Anglophone like me did manage to get by saying bonjour, hi, which I'm told was local lingo for apologizing for not speaking French.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the majority of Quebecois are relatively comfortable being bilingual, but they would prefer for people to learn to speak French if they possibly could. Now, the thing I remember about Montreal is the food.
Oh, yes. Wonderful food. Fantastic restaurants. We went to some. I went to some when I wasn't with you on other trips. And, it's
Sure.
just,
Yeah. And we're hoping to be back next year.
It's actually this, next year. Right. I got the years wrong. I forget what year we're, we've been cooped up here so long, and now I guess April's now about 4,000 days. I forget which year it is.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that is the plan.
Yes, next year the World Fantasy Convention will be taking place in Montreal, and we are both planning to go and have lots of nice food. I should say hello to Scott Edelman. I'm sure he will be there and looking for good restaurants.
Yes, I have one possibility myself that I went to. I mean, maybe touristy related, but I did try their tasting menu at Napoleon Restaurant, and I really enjoyed it. So we'll talk to Scott about it.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing much of the city. I remember being told that there were a lot of Russian restaurants in Montreal.
I didn't get a chance to see that.
I mean, the other thing, of course, is that the Canadian Grand Prix takes place on the Ile de Montreal. But you don't want to go there when that's on because it'll be like packed out and everything will be very expensive. Yeah, I'd prefer to watch it on TV.
When I stayed there during the World Science Fiction Convention, whose shirt I'm wearing, I stayed over at the Holiday Inn in Chinatown, which I found quite interesting. That was one place where you could get good meals at any hour because the Chinese restaurants stayed open until I think it was like 3 or 4 in the morning. I think we went there early in the morning, wee hours of the morning once. I was interested in the fact that there was a monument there to Sun Yat-sen, which so it was interesting to me. As one thing that I take from reminding. Another thing about Montreal is the fascinating warrens that it has underneath and around the streets.
The Undercity.
The Undercity, yes.
Yes. Now, this is something that will be familiar to our Finnish friends, of course, that we were talking about yesterday, because Helsinki as well has an Undercity, but the Canadians have really got it off pat.
Yes, some cities. I've been to Calgary once. They have it not an undercity but an overcity. They call it the plus 15 because it's 15 feet higher and 15 degrees warmer. So
right.
And if you are in a cold climate and places where it snows regularly in the winter, it's a really good way to get around and not have. Now it takes longer, but you don't have to go out in the snow.
Absolutely. So, you can cover the whole of central Montreal very easily without going above ground.
Let me see what other things about it. It just the city seemed very beautiful to me, and I think I made a point at one point about how it was. It seemed a lot, how to put it, cleaner than an American city of its size. They take more care of it that I'm used to in a big city like that, and I thought that was a good thing. Really, obviously.
I think that's my general impression of Canadian cities as compared to the US is that in many cases they are quite similar but cleaner and tidier.
Yeah.
Shall we move on now to Toronto, which is another place we've been for conventions.
We have.
And is possibly slightly better known. We're now back in the English-speaking part of Canada. I'll be having a chat with Nalo Hopkinson about Toronto, but I've been there a lot because I have clients in the city, so I sort of travel there on business. It's also the main entry point, really, from the UK. When you fly to Canada from London, Toronto is the obvious place to fly into. But, different from you, of course, coming from the West Coast.
Yeah. Toronto is an interesting city, really. Even though it's not, I think it's the largest city in Canada, but everything is relative. It is actually not as big as, even though it's the largest city, it's not the biggest city, when you compare it to their American neighbors. But I can certainly see some of the elements of why Toronto is sometimes used as a stand-in for New York when filming things. And in particular, their subway is apparently almost a clone of the New York subway mechanically, except it's mirror imaged. Much smaller, only the few lines, but mirror imaged. So transit geeks like me will know the difference. But other than that, that sort of thing. But it was is easy to get around the places we wanted to go to. There were lots of good places to eat. The city
Toronto has
seemed really
got
nice.
so much better since they put in a train from the airport to the main railway station.
Oh, very much so. It's much easier to get there, I would think. I really, the time having to fiddle around with buses or taxis, I just don't like that very much.
Yeah. Of course, the very American thing about Toronto is that they have a Major League Baseball team.
That they do, and I did not see any ball games there, but I went up in the CN Tower, which is right next. Actually, it's called Canada. Yeah, Canada's National Tower now. I had to, but I went up to the tower, which is right next door to the stadium. I would have liked to have seen a ball game there. And in fact, there was the opportunity to do so on one of my trips, but I just didn't have the time. I was too busily scheduled on the days involved. I certainly couldn't have afforded one of the hotel rooms that looks right out onto the field. That would have been interesting, although they have had to warn people about the fact that, by the way, people can see in as well as out.
And the television cameras might look in as well.
Famously, they have done so, in fact. I mentioned the tower. It really is one of those big tall towers. Went up there, got a great view of everything. On a clear day, you can see America across the lake. It's just, let me see what else. There was the. Remember when we on one of those trips we went to the library, and
right.
And that's more than that. That sounds, well, that's boring. Not this library. If you're into science fiction.
That, of course, is the Judith Merrill collection, which I will be talking about to Nalo as well. It's one of the biggest collections of science fiction books in the world, and therefore an important place for us. And Toronto also has Back of Phoenix Books, which is a great little specialist science fiction.
It certainly was. It certainly is. Yeah, is rather. So let's see. Yep. I'd go back. I've been there I've been there sometimes without you, and sometimes with you. So, and
I tend to fly through Toronto when we're going to the west coast of Canada.
That's
I was supposed to be there in April, but of course that entire trip got cancelled.
Yeah.
Never mind.
I guess we go west now.
We're further west, yes. Now we go to somewhere I haven't been, but you have. Tell us all about Winnipeg.
Well, Winnipeg, it's been way too long since I've been there. Since the last time I was there was 1994, when I was part of one of the organizing committee for the Winnipeg World Science Fiction Convention. And I was up there for a number of meetings planning it over the years involved. So I got to see it at all seasons. I've always remembered we got some relatively inexpensive airline tickets for people to come in and as site inspection tickets. The key thing there, they did have to be taken, they had to be used in the winter when demand is low. So I came up there once in January. It is a little interesting in January. I'd never been in any place where I went outside and suddenly my glasses frosted over from the heat coming off my eyeballs.
Right.
But in the summertime, it was quite pleasant. The temperatures were very calm and, or rather, cool is wrong, mild. I guess it rained one day. Because I remember I was told is that the temperatures tended to average around 15 to 20 degrees Celsius with a 20% chance of rain in August. And in fact, that was the average temperature. And of the 5-day event, it rained one day. So there you go. I went up there on one of my trips during they have an annual event that celebrates the massive cultural diversity and ethnic diversity of Winnipeg. They have a huge amount of it, and they give you a little booklet, and you go around to the different groups putting on events, talking about their groups with their food and their culture and their sports and ethnic dress and their alcohol, which I didn't fancy, but and they stamp your passport book of all the things you've been. That was great fun. I enjoyed it a great deal. So it was a great time, great food, great people.
Is there anything touristy at all in Winnipeg? I mean, anything that it's famous for?
Well, it has museums that I didn't get as much chance to go to. I don't know if the train ride is still there that I got on. There was a train ride out into the countryside it takes you out to a farmer's market. And I'm not absolutely sure it's there. And I did enjoy that. I'm not certain that I know the tourism of the area that well, because I was there basically going in and out for convention planning trips. Indeed, that got me into a little bit of trouble on that winter trip, because coming back into the US, the American entry people just could not comprehend that anybody from San Jose, California would ever fly to Winnipeg in the winter in January. And I said, no, I'm just a volunteer. I was going up for this event at my own expense. So, but they eventually let me back in, obviously.
Sure. Well, you're a US citizen. They have to let you back in. It's just
eventually.
How much they tax you.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. And did you get penalized and something like that? But yeah, it was only annoying, not frightening.
The reason I asked about tourism was because I know Alberta has fantastic dinosaur beds, but I don't think that stretches all the way to Winnipeg.
No, and I feel bad about not knowing more about the tourism opportunities there, because talking of Alberta, we can make a brief stop heading west to Calgary, where I helped organize the West Coast Science Fantasy Conference that was held there. And it was held in downtown Calgary. And I also got a little opportunity to see a few of the other things there. First of all, I want to talk about the food there. I hope it's still there if I ever get a chance to go back there. There's a place in Calgary called the River Cafe that specializes entirely in Canadian game foods and delicious food. I went there multiple times and put a huge dent in my wallet, I'm afraid, but it was fantastic. And I would highly recommend it to anybody. So and it was a short walk from downtown, because the whole area in the downtown around there was redeveloped for the Winter Olympic Games, and it's a really nice, pleasant area. I told you about the walkways as well, but we also on one of the trips went out to Alberta Heritage Park, which is in Calgary, and it recreates the settlement history of Calgary. There, all of there's a lot of historic buildings. Some of them are actually real buildings that were relocated. They've got I remember there's blacksmiths demonstrating how they built stuff during that. There's not a little tourist train ride exactly. There's a full size steam railroad train pulling a set of cars around. It's a pretty good sized park. And this was important. We were there not in the winter, but in the early spring, as I recall. And it's still quite cold. And there was in this railroad car, it was heated in the old-fashioned way with a coal stove down at one end of the car. And so, and it demonstrated exactly what one of the, because typically the coal stove would be at one end of the car, and it was exactly the way it's been described. If you were down at that end, it was way too hot. And if you got down to the other end, you're still too cold. And so you could see what they recreated it quite like that. And I said, okay, I've experienced it now. Other friends of mine went to went out to the dinosaur museums and museum and where all the bones are being dug up even to this day.
Fossils.
fossils. I lost the word.
I know.
Yeah, so
Happens to me these days as
yeah,
well.
I know. I didn't get a chance to go out to that. If one is driving, you have the opportunity to drive through the Canadian Rockies, which are even more spectacular than their American cousins to the south. I haven't had a chance to do that myself. I've been told about it. It is quite the drive and quite nice. There are numerous opportunities out there. Calgary is in many ways a lot like Denver. It is located at the edge of the plains and right before the mountains start up. And it also has a lot of the similarities of being it's the west of its country. And it just like the American West and the Canadian West had a lot of similarities with each other culturally. They include, and Calgary celebrates that to this day with the Calgary Stampede.
Yeah, a couple of days back, I was in Wi-Fi Sci-Fi with Premier Mohammed, and she described Alberta as the Texas of Canada.
I think that's not a bad suggestion for it. Yeah, that could well be the case. And that can have good and bad elements to it.
Sure. Yes. Culturally, not so good, but
yeah. And even so, everything is going to be a somewhat nicer version. If you.
Of course.
Yeah. So let me see. Westward ho, then.
Vancouver.
Yes. Now, you and I have both been there. I've been there some other trips without you, actually. The West Coast Science Fantasy Conference was there once as well, and I got a chance to visit that. I went and saw Vancouver itself. It's a big Canadian city. It's a lot like Seattle. It wasn't. Not a lot stood out directly to me, but it did have. I liked the anthropological museum. That was quite interesting, and that was there on the campus of the University of British Columbia on one of my trips. I don't think we didn't get a chance to go see that. I don't think.
No, well, we did go to see the Chinatown where they had.
We did.
There's this wonderful garden there, and also, of course, some memorial to the Chinese workers on the Canadian Railway.
That's right. Same thing as on the American Transcon. Chinese workers, very hardworking, and it could not have been done without all of their work and sacrifice.
Vancouver always strikes me as a very sporty city. It's right on the lake. It's got the mountains around it. It's somewhere where people are always going skiing on something.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? There's not been a lot of cities. Helsinki's one of them, where there's a municipal ferry boat that takes you across to the other side of the water. And we popped over there once, and you saw all the watercraft, large and small, out there on the river, which is an estuary. On a trip I was there without you, I drove up to. I've forgotten where the name. I wouldn't be able to pronounce it. The Vancouver Railroad Museum is a fair distance north on the highway up that direction, but a lot of interesting equipment, including some equipment that I personally don't think belongs there, because it's some from American. In fact, I actually said, you ought to do a trade, because this piece of equipment you've got here belongs down in Southern California, and they've got a piece of your equipment down there. It's like,
yeah.
Well.
Alrighty. So I mean, Vancouver, to a certain extent for us, is a jumping-off point.
That's right.
Because it's where you catch the ferry to Vancouver Island.
That's right.
And the city of Victoria, which is just beautiful.
And I really enjoyed the ferry trip. As a great. I don't care. The bus ride down is not so much fun. I sort of wish they'd build a railroad down to it. That'd be a lot easier. But to extend the SkyTrain down that far, but it's not very likely. But how long is the ferry crossing? Hour and a half? Something like that?
Did you want to talk about the railway? Because I sort of cut you off.
Well,
Vancouver
just
does
a
have
little
a train.
bit. It has it has a transit system with a fairly advanced, for its time, a linear induction motor automated transit system. That means it runs on. It isn't like it's a traditional rail system. It very interesting to me as a transit buff, and they built another line that uses different technology, which is unfortunate from a, again, transit buff sort of point of view. But it meant we could get around a whole lot of Vancouver fairly easily, just hop on a train and go where we wanted to. But But yeah, I mean, if a transit buff would be interested in going to it, and we didn't even cover all the lines. That's the thing. I also, after our last trip, I had to go back down to Seattle. So, we put me off on a train. There are several trains a day that run down to Seattle that run fairly slowly down to the U.S. border because there's no money to pay for track repairs, apparently. And then it just zips along down the rest of the way to Seattle. But nevertheless, we went on down to Vancouver, and as I say, I really enjoyed, just as a good start, just the ferry crossing. And it's a car and passenger ferry. It's nothing special, but it was just a really nice trip.
Yeah, it was quite small compared to the ferries that I took in Finland out to the Åland Islands, but it's fun. It's about half an hour or something like that, I think.
Yeah, I think it ran a little while, but it's just, especially if you got your timing right and got into the restaurant before everybody else, and get your food and settle down by the window and watch the world go by.
Now, generally, of course, we've been going there in early spring, and the weather hasn't been great, but I can imagine it'd be fun out on deck watching the islands go by if you were doing it in the summer.
Yeah, and then from there you have to catch the bus down to Victoria.
Yeah.
Which gets you to the really nice part, because I thought Victoria is one of the nicer cities we've ever visited.
It surely is. It's a really beautiful place. And they have fabulous municipal buildings. There's a harbour there, and nice restaurants. Yeah, and a fabulous hotel that we stay in.
That's right, a really nice hotel they have there, after all. Yeah, you mentioned the municipal buildings. The Victoria is the provincial capital, and the Capitol building is all outlined in lights. So every night it's all lit up like Christmas, it seems like to me. It's just outlined in white.
And it's a very British imperial building as well.
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, it is said, although you scoffed at this, that Victoria is Canada's most British city, or is trying to be Britain. But yeah, I guess it's trying to look like it in places.
It is trying to look like it, and they have British-style pubs and all that sort of thing. Although it is very clearly a Canadian city and not a British one. Now, from a tourist point of view, of course, there's a whole lot of stuff that we really haven't had time to do. Partly because we're there too earlier in the year, but you can go whale watching and stuff from Victoria.
Right out of the harbor, you could catch one of the ships there. You could they've got seaplane tours that take off and land in the harbor. We went to the museum that was there near downtown.
I think if you go there in August, there's even a bear spotting tour.
I didn't know that. Yeah, that's interesting.
But yes, the Native People's Museum was absolutely fascinating. The Native Americans who lived on the West Coast managed to avoid being wiped out by European invaders for rather longer than the rest of their compatriots. And there's some amazing stuff that they've got there.
Yeah. Something that we've wanted to do but haven't had a chance to, we were contemplating doing at this last trip, which was scuppered, of course, was the big gardens that are advertised all along the West Coast that I've seen. And even in this early, there's something there to see at any season of the year, they say. So we would have been there in spring. We would have had stuff to see. And I would still like to go see those. I'm not necessarily a big ornamental gardens person, but just as you've said in your visit to California, and when we went down to what was now called the Gilroy Gardens, that kind of stuff is quite interesting. I mean, I enjoy that kind of things, and I would have liked to, and I hope we get a chance to see it sometime.
Sure. Well, the chances are we're going to go back. The reason that we end up in Victoria is because the University of Victoria is the only university in the world to have a chair in transgender studies. And every couple of years they hold a big conference. So I pop along to it from an academic point of view, and it's a good excuse for us to have a holiday, because you can come up from where you live and I'm flying in there anyway.
That's right. And I find it interesting. I meing, it's also interesting in another sense of being, I guess, sort of the minority at the event.
There you go.
There we go. Hey, I just doing my part, you might say.
Sure.
And I learn things, and we get to spend time together, and I'll be happy to go back when I get a chance.
Great. Well, hopefully we will get to go back next April.
I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Well, that's about us done on Canada, I think. If we go any further west, we will fall into the Pacific. But it is a lovely country.
Yeah, there are things I'd like to do. I'd really love to take the train across the country, the Canadian from Vancouver to Toronto.
Yeah.
If we get a chance, it's a great experience, I'm told. But
the next time we're in Toronto, I must take you to the Inuit Art Museum, which is absolutely beautiful.
Great. I'm looking forward to that too. We'll get a chance.
With any luck, next year, Victoria and Montreal.
Good. Yeah. I hope so.
For real, rather than virtual.
That's right.